Welcome to the Indiana Athletic Trainers Association podcast. The IATA is dedicated to advancing the profession of athletic training and empowering membership through advocacy, education, networking, and innovative resources. To find out more about the IATA, check out our website and social media pages. The views and opinions expressed by speakers, guests, or others who have provided materials to and for this podcast are not necessarily those of the IATA. The IATA assumes no responsibility for, nor endorses any of the comments, recommendations, or materials that are provided. Welcome back, everybody, to the IATA podcast. My name is Daniel Welty. I'm the host of this episode, and excited to continue our Catching Up with Past Presidents series. And today on the podcast have Ned Shannon. Ned, welcome on to the podcast.
Thanks, Daniel. It's great to be here. It's great to be inside on such a hot outside afternoon. So this was good timing.
Yep, summer is definitely here in the June month, and so obviously many people know you around the state of Indiana and the athletic training and sports medicine community. But for those that don't know you, if you don't mind just doing a introduction of yourself.
Sure. Lived here all my life. Grew up on the west side of Indianapolis. Went to what was then IUPUI. Now it's U Indianapolis or IU Indianapolis. I believe I'm saying that correctly. It's a big mouthful, I think, these days. IUPUI is a lot easier, rolls off a little easier. But got into athletic training undergraduate program there at IUPUI. It was guided by Jay Bradley, one of my early mentors, and just really was a big influence on my career early on, and reflecting back on many things as I went through. So one of the pieces that I knew I wanted to move towards, or at least career path that I wanted to move towards within athletic training, was at the collegiate level. Probably figured this out my junior year. So I had pretty much that year and my senior year to make some plans, and Jay was instrumental in helping me get introduced to Ralph Reef. And I may have met him earlier through Jay from that standpoint. And Ralph had a position open at Butler University the year that I was finishing IUPUI. So I began Butler University as a graduate assistant, and was to be a 2-year program. A year into it, they had developed a full-time position, so it was offered to me and took it. So it kind of took the accelerator off a little bit, which was okay, I think. I was starting a family at that point too, as well, as far as completing my master's. So instead of grinding through in another year or so, I had several years to finish that. So it was very comfortable from that aspect. I finished my master's in education a couple of years later at Butler University, stayed on a couple of years after that. And again, just through connections, they're very, very common in a lot of industries, particularly athletic training and sports in general, with coaches and athletes and all of the things that those folks get into, but administrators. But Ralph was a graduate of the University of Indianapolis, and at that point, their head athletic trainer position was opening. What would have been my last year at Butler University. So applied for that. Was lucky enough to get that position. Summer of 1993, I think, is where we are, of basically timing, and started at University of Indianapolis, which I know, Daniel, you're very familiar with your undergraduate work, and stayed there for 25 years as a head athletic trainer. Helped to develop a undergraduate and then eventually parts of the graduate program, which now continues to exist there. Did some teaching, oversaw staff, got involved with a lot of great students. I think it was probably somewhere 2018, maybe late 2017, 2018, was approached by a couple of business people that had some connections with the Indianapolis Fire Department and some efforts that they were interested in doing for improving the healthcare for specifically their firefighters, and started conversations with developing a company called Pro Team Tactical Performance, which is where I've been the last 6.5 years. So we provide orthopedic healthcare for first responders, so fire, police primarily, but we do EMS In some cities, we do take care of those folks as well as some corrections officers. Haven't jumped into the military side of things yet, but that's kind of all part of that tactical athlete world. But primarily fire and police, or we take care of acute, subacute, chronic musculoskeletal injuries, just like a lot of other athletic trainers around the country do in colleges and high schools and junior highs and clubs and professional sports and everything in between. We provide that for those folks, and it's a very fulfilling opportunity to be able to help these first responders and when they're in times of need, because typically they're assisting all of us when we're having not such good days in our world sometimes. So yeah, it's been very fun.
Yeah. Well, a full career and still going at this point. And but I want to kind of kind of go back a couple of years at least here, and kind of your involvement with the IATA. Where did that kind of start, and then kind of into your role and as the IATA president?
Yeah, good question. Um, I couldn't tell you the exact year. I think it was potentially when I was still at IUPUI as an undergrad, and um, not to date myself too much, but the ITA formed, I think, my sophomore year or my freshman year in that range somewhere. I might have been my sophomore year. So I kind of grew up with the ITA a little bit. And I know there's several other athletic trainers in the state of Indiana that have had done so as well. Um, so I think towards the end of my undergrad, early Butler years, graduate school, I'll say, had the opportunity to work with Steve Reisinger, who was the head athletic trainer at Anderson University, who was involved in the education side of the IATA, the symposiums that we now know that happen every summer. Those had just started. And so they were looking at being able to get as many people on deck as possible to help out with organizational things. And I took a very small role with the education committee that dealt with the audio visual. And so I was the guy that was in charge of the microphones and the projectors and the screens. And this was before the internet and before podcasts. And so it wasn't nearly as complicated as it is now. But there were challenges there when we would go into hotels, basically, and here in Indianapolis, and be able to put on a good show, if you will, with the education side of things for the attendees. And then just kind of moved, I think, through the ranks a little bit. My name was thrown out early 2000s, I think, or thrown in the hat, I guess, for the IATA president, and took that role in 2004, as you know. And at that point, it was a kind of a monumental effort. I think, if I recall, you were 2 years as president elect, 2 years as president, and then 2 years as past president. And that's been kind of reassembled here to make it a little bit more palatable, I think, for those that might be interested in that. So a 6 year commitment of monthly meetings and other things. And then when you're president, you're also involved with GLADA and so forth. So, but was lucky enough to have that opportunity, and started my true 2 years, I think, from 2004 to 2006, and then finished up the last 2 years.
Yeah. And a little bit, going back to 2002 area when you're president-elect, what was the landscape of athletic training like at that time, and kind of as you kind of roll into your presidency, what that landscape looked like in the
Sure,
athletic training world?
sure. I believe the IATA as a organization was approaching 1,000 members, and I believe that even included students, if I'm not mistaken. Um, but now it's definitely more than that. So building that base of athletic trainers in the state of Indiana was one of the things that was maybe a little bit different from what it is now. Um, I think that the other piece that was maybe more impactful for a lot of athletic trainers in the state, we had successfully achieved licensure in the late 90s. So 1997 always comes to my mind, and I could be off by a year or so, 97, 98, but it was in the late 90s we achieved licensure. So we were all kind of getting our feet underneath us for how that was going to impact employment in the state, reimbursement in the state, the way we were viewed as medical professionals, because at that point we were still trying to carve out that trainer versus athletic trainer type title, and that continues, I think, even today. But that was a big deal as far as who we were, what we did, what our role, what our scope of practice continues to be. So that was something of an identity challenge for us, not a crisis, but just one that we continually push towards identifying ourselves as a certified athletic trainer instead of just trainer. Because I'm old school, I think when I hear that occasionally, luckily on television or radio or wherever, and I'm referred to as a trainer, I kind of cringe a little bit. I think a lot of us do that of that era, but that has changed immensely from that standpoint. The education end of things with how one would become an athletic trainer had matured. You had the two different routes. I know when I was going through, it was kind of coming to a closure shortly after I think I got into Butler University. Believe it or not, they had an accredited program for a short period of time as well, and I was kind of in the early phases of construction of that with Ralph and others, which was a lot of fun for me to learn and be able to take forward as I did with the University of Indianapolis. But the internship route was where a lot of us that will go way back went through, and I won't get into the details of that. And then you had the curriculum route, which is kind of what we see in that undergraduate program that certainly you were involved in your college years. Those were blended, and moving forward, certainly we know that it's now moved into the master's level, and there's pieces of those old routes that are still involved in the master's program. But that was another piece that was changing, evolving, moving forward from that aspect. And I think it was another piece that brought legitimacy to our profession, that we just didn't just put ice bags on and tape ankles and stand on the sideline and those kinds of things. There was becoming a lot more science to add to the art of athletic training as we progressed forward. So that was something that was really a neat time. That was a neat evolution. And I know with my involvement and others at the University of Indianapolis, it was fun to be able to see that take place. I think we were all lucky enough to be in a setting that was small enough that it was a lot of personal interaction with other departments on campus that once they kind of saw where this was, and maybe they had some interaction with their children or themselves potentially with athletic trainers, they can understand what our role was in the athletic department, both at the university level as well as the high school level. The other thing I know that was a big improvement in the state, this trended more and more as we went through the years, was adding certified athletic trainers to high schools. Now it's pretty much a common thing to see that high school with a full-time athletic trainer that the high school employs. That wasn't the case. Either the high school didn't have it or they shared one. If they didn't have one, or if they shared one, it was typically an athletic trainer that was hired by a clinic, which was great. And then they were assigned to those schools or a school, and they would do their job. So it was a nice next step. But to be able to see high schools, particularly in the rural areas of Indiana, gain that type of healthcare benefit, as we all are aware of, and then eventually, I'll say, own that type of benefit, meaning they employed that athletic trainer full time at that school. I think it says a lot about athletic trainers all over the state as far as being able to be excellent stewards of our profession, to promote that type of popularity that we see now and we enjoy now when our kids and friends and others go through high school and junior high and even club sports, and have the protection of what athletic trainers can provide as far as medical providers. So that was another piece, I think, that was kind of the landscape a bit from that end of things. But still a lot of good people that had designed and installed the licensure back in the mid 80s, where they were still fully involved with athletic training as providing that day-to-day care as well as guidance for the IATA. So that was very helpful. There were a lot of folks that were my age and younger that were that were starting to develop their interest in promoting athletic training from a governmental side or a legislation side, and being able to provide that next step for others that were coming up the ranks.
Yeah. And you kind of mentioned some of it, but what were some challenges, specifically as president of the IATA, back in 2004 to 2006? What were some of those challenges maybe that you faced as president and kind of going along with some of the landscape of things within athletic
Yeah,
training?
yeah. I guess I'm lucky. When I was president, 2004 to 6, there weren't any major issues or challenges that were on the forefront. That was, hey, we got to get this done, and we've got a certain time frame to get it done in. Much like a lot of the legislation things. Um, there was still planning that was going on, so I won't call it a challenge, but we kind of challenged ourselves a little bit. There was still a lot of planning going on to improve our bill and be able to get reimbursement improved for athletic trainers, reimbursement to begin with for athletic trainers, um, and promote the profession of athletic training in that respect. We were still, making a lot of headway with having athletic trainers active in clinics and industrial settings and newer areas, maybe from there. Um, and that was something that kind of took a life of its own going forward. But at the same time, going back kind of the education side of things, the education, the IATA fall meetings, being able to provide a good product there that would attract as many athletic trainers as we could get mid-fall, mid-football season, early week. We switched from a one-day event to a two-day event, if I recall. So it was a Sunday and a Monday. They used to have teacher education days way back, and a lot of high schools would not have class that day, and it would give the athletic trainer a chance to be able to break away from where they were, maybe 45 minutes or an hour and a half or 2 hours away, to drive to Indianapolis, at least for a Monday, if not maybe come in on Sunday evening after that last practice, or if they had anything going on Sunday evening, and be able to do a Sunday morning or Sunday evening, Monday morning, maybe early afternoon, and they would scurry back to their commitments. But being able to provide a good product there that would attract athletic trainers, and getting the best speakers as possible. We've been so fortunate, and I think you know this in your career as well. In the city of Indianapolis and central Indiana, we've had so many great athletic trainers, of course, but we've had so many good sports medicine individuals, physicians, physical therapists, occupational therapists, what it might have been at that point, or developed into physician assistants, all the folks that you might be coming in contact as an athletic trainer and providing your health care to your athletes and folks. We had a lot of great people around us that we could ideally bring in and have a talk on a 45-minute on rotator cuff, or have a talk about entrepreneurism in athletic training as a business owner, and everything in between. So being able to organize that, I think during my presidency, in consistently keeping that ball rolling forward, was something that, again, we kind of challenged ourselves. But I don't think there were any big groundbreaking things that we were able to overcome in that 2 years, maybe luckily so. So it was a little less pressurized from that end of things. But we would meet once a month in Speedway. I think at the time it was a bed and breakfast. It definitely is now. And those were the early days, again, with even the legislation side of things, because we had brought on what now is KWK, I believe. Now it's a different name, but it was from KWK, which was the um, um, lobbyist group for the IATA. Once we established that relationship, we moved downtown and started meeting in downtown Indianapolis next to the State House. They were kind enough to be able to provide their offices. Now I'm sure it's probably all done electronically, like we're doing now, Zoom-wise or whatnot, and makes it a lot easier. But it was really nice to have everybody come in and sit at a table. You had probably as many as 15 people around the table. Everybody was welcome as far as any membership that wanted to attend. I think that's still the case. But you could attend the executive committee meetings and just kind of sit along the side. It didn't happen very much, I don't think, at least I remember in the 6 years I was there. But you had a number of people. You had we brought on student representatives as well. That was pretty exciting for them to see kind of the internal workings of things. You know, what happens behind the curtain kind of deal. And that was a lot of fun. So having those folks around the table, I guess where I'm going with that was very good, very, kind of old style, but it got a lot of things done, and you could read the room a lot easier than you can in a video conference kind of thing, so to speak, particularly if the cameras aren't on. So from that end of things, I think that was a piece that was continuing on, and therefore produced some good outcomes and decision making and timely decision making, and hearing a lot of input during those meetings.
And you've talked a lot about, obviously, because I asked you the question, the landscape of athletic training and where it was, and obviously a lot of the things that were on the forefront then changing, and probably in the past 10 years, a lot has changed, again, whether it be education or whether it be, these emerged settings that are now and that you work in now. And so what was something from the landscape of athletic training that is happening now that you would never guess would be happening now that back in your time? Hopefully I phrased that right, but something
Yeah,
that's like, man, that I can't believe we're doing that now.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's a good question. I don't know that I can really specifically think of something. If I do, I'll throw it out. I guess kind of the first thing that comes to my mind is maybe the athletic trainer in the entertainment industry. I see so many times the Cirque du Soleil in Las Vegas and overseas in Paris and other countries, advertising for athletic trainers. And I've talked to a few athletic trainers that have actually done that for a short period of time. But the entertainment industry and the way that maybe that direction goes with those individuals that are more physically active, in movies or in on stage or something along those lines. The Rockettes come to mind too, out on the East Coast. I think that's something that's been around for a while, but still is not the typical setting that you would see, folks go into. I think one other piece maybe that is very current, as of at least the last few years, has been the emergence of the female athletic trainer in professional sports, specifically football, NFL. Being able to see those young women establish their presence in those settings, and do very, very well. I'm always impressed, trying to see as much as I can, like a lot of athletic trainers do on Sunday afternoon when they have the sideline shots, who's there, and not that you recognize any faces, but you start recognize who are the athletic training staff, who's the medical staff, that kind of thing. And many of them are great looking young ladies as far as their self-esteem and the way that they handle themselves on the sideline, and the professionalism really is what I'm trying to say. It's been very, very impressive, I think, from that aspect. And then you look at the gender as we've gone through. It's I always feel it's been female heavy. Now, way back, my time or way before mine, very, very male heavy. But I mean, you could probably think about your class and the male female balance there. We always felt lucky to be able to have a 50-50 split. We thought that was great, but that wasn't the case. Usually it was a little bit higher with the ladies and a few less with the men as we go along. And I think at many schools now, it's kind of that same way. So it's really great that you see the females breaking into and establishing themselves, probably at this point, in professional organizations, and really leading both in the clinical setting as well as the educational setting, and in the collegiate level as well. So there's a number of different job avenues that takes place, and I think that's very impressive. Beyond that, just maybe just the electronic medical records and what we're doing now with meetings and educational seminars, with certainly the advent of the internet and being able to do these things very, very easily. Yeah, 1984 to 1988 to the early 2000s that, that was not nearly, didn't exist. It did not, isn't nearly anything like the way it is now. So, I mean, phone conferences were the big deal there, but having this type of platform to be able to gain your CEUs as you go through the year, if you choose to be able to do that, the ease in being able to do that, and the broad spectrum of topics that you can choose from with a lot of these resources that you can get or subscribe to. So from that aspect, I think that's another big piece that's dramatically different. And yeah, probably didn't really consider anything like that. Watching technology evolve, you think, oh, well, great, that's the next best thing. And then it seems like a few years later, it's even better. And here we are.
Yeah, ever changing the technology world nowadays, and it just you think you have something down and it changes, and or the program changes, or there's updates, or who knows what it is. It's just
Yeah.
it goes really fast.
Yeah.
Um, what's one of the things that maybe a story or a moment, whether it be from your IATA presidency or maybe even back to working with Jay Bradley at IUPUI, what's
Yeah.
like a memorable story, something that was like, oh yeah, like that's kind of something that's always been in your mind and you think about.
Yeah. Excuse me. Good question. I know that kind of our early days at University of Indianapolis, we had myself and the program director, Connie Pompelli, had established some connections with local schools, and New Palestine schools were one of those. And there was a middle school, Doe Creek Middle School, that would, I think, kind of on a regular basis between the two of us, want to have us come out along with others to do their professional day. And so we would have the chance to be able to talk to sixth, seventh, eighth graders, or seventh, eighth, ninth graders. I forget what the age group was, but it was in that realm, about what athletic training was, and be able to do a real quick nutshell, because you only had, maybe 35 minutes or 40 minutes or something to kind of keep them mesmerized until they scurried off to the next professional. So being able to talk to kids that age, I think was a lot of fun, because that was totally out of my wheelhouse. 18 to 22-year-olds were my life, other than my kids, were my life, for all those years. So being able to talk with them and kind of explain what we do, and kind of see them understand that, because they were of that age group, to be able to kind of see how that works. And they were also, many of them were athletes, or they were physical active. Maybe they were cheerleaders or gymnasts, in the club situation, or they were that football or baseball or softball or tennis or whatever. So from that aspect, they had some idea. But usually kids that young don't get hurt that bad, so they don't see a lot of athletic trainers. But being able to tape an ankle, of a seventh grader was kind of fun, and they would all think that was really neat. And I think I would bring a TENS unit, one of those portable TENS units, and put that on a wrist, and make their hand move in wild ways, that kind of thing. That always got a lot of really wild reactions from that and things. So that was a lot of fun to be able to do that with a different group of kids, or students, if you will. And hopefully that may be developed into something later on, maybe not athletic training, but maybe another type of medical field that they got into. Who knows? From that aspect, I would think at this point they're well into their careers as we're talking here. But I think that was kind of a cool thing. That was maybe not so much with the IATA, but I talked about how you became an athletic trainer, how you maintained your licensure certification, and certainly had something to do with education. Certainly had something to do with our state association, with providing the guardrails for those of us that are licensed. So it was something that that kind of always comes to mind, I think, when I think about things I did in the past. Of course, you have the big games, and you have the big injuries, and like happened just last night from that aspect. So, but yeah, it's been a really neat thing to see that kind of evolve, as far as more and more individuals becoming interested in healthcare, and then specifically athletic training, as we've gone out and spoken to different groups, that kind of thing. I always enjoy talking about what we do as athletic trainers, continue to enjoy talking about that, which is kind of part of my role now. But I've always enjoyed in educating folks. That I used to tell, and you may remember this comment I've made, that as an athletic training student, you're going to be around the Thanksgiving table, and the apple pie and the peach pie and the pumpkin pie is getting sliced up, and Aunt Jane, that's in from out of town, hears that you're in sports medicine. She starts our athletic training and she starts asking you about weight loss and how she can become fit. And, all of a sudden we have to kind of say, well, that's kind of what we do, but this is really how we do our art and craft as athletic trainers. Talking to groups to be able to help them to be good stewards of our profession, and understand what we do so it can be paid forward from there. So that's been something that's been very enjoyable throughout my entire career.
Yeah, definitely being an advocate and for the profession, and obviously that's extremely. I think what you mentioned it before, but I think kind of a obviously when we think about grassroots efforts now in athletic training, we kind of think about it at a state level,
Mhm.
but really grassroots efforts and specifically probably back, with licensure and even up to your time as president, like grassroots efforts, while it was state, could be state level, there was a lot of grassroots within individual school districts or within individual athletic trainers just self-advocating for themselves to get these maybe full-time positions, and things like that. Okay, maybe they're part-time out of school, but now they didn't want to be full-time because there's a need there and there's a value there, right? And I think we still see that today, that we can all do advocacy at a grassroots level down to an individual, and that one-on-one connection. And you never know where that's going to go. When you were talking about, going to New Pal and talking to those middle school students. And I, if you people go back and listen to a previous podcast with President Becky Clifton, she tells a cool story just recently at GLATA, and how a student came up to her and about the impact she made and saw her on the sidelines working and doing her job as an athletic trainer, and got inspired, and then became an athletic trainer, or an athletic training student to be an athletic trainer. And she went up to her and said, hey, and Becky had no idea that was going to happen. And so I think that's kind of the cool thing. Sometimes it's like we're just doing our normal things, and you were just being a professional and advocating and sharing the great things that we get to do as athletic trainers. And you never know what that inspired people to do, whether it be sports medicine or whatever the case may be in healthcare.
You're exactly right. Countless times I had spoken with younger athletic trainers than myself at the time, and this was that same era, late 90s, early 2000s, and they said, hey, I just had a great meeting with the booster club at my high school, to talk about what I do as an athletic trainer, but then also, hey, I needed to get a new ultrasound machine or a new ice machine or something like that. And PTA groups and all the things that happen in that high school solar system of different entities. Many times I spoke to athletic trainers just in just casual conversations, and they had really nice success stories about how well they were received by that group. And in the short time that they had, was probably less than 10 minutes, to be able to make their case for, hey, I could do this permanently here for you if the school system could make some upgrades and changes, to I need a new ice machine because this one's on its last leg, and preseason's coming up and we need to, all those things. So from that aspect, that was a lot of fun to hear others' stories of their promotion of athletic training and how they successfully, as you said, from a grassroots standpoint, were able to meet goals. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think about too, like just kind of the individual successes like that. I think it's a lot of a reminder for us, and the reasons I like to have these conversations with past presidents and people that have seen a lot of changes in athletic training. It's like we also have to speak up for ourselves, right? Because we can kind of, and I think people as general, do have some self-doubt, right? It's like, well, I don't want to ask for that because I don't want to seem needy, or but it's like until you can say, hey, this is what we need, and this is how I can
Mhm.
better help my job, and help really, ultimately the patients that we get to serve. That's ultimately what I think athletic training is still about. Like we still care about our patients. All right. And that's what we
Absolutely.
want to do the most. And so sometimes we have to also speak up, even though it may feel weird or uncomfortable for us to do that.
Mhm. Mhm.
I think it's vitally important that we do that because we
Mhm.
want to take better care of our patients.
Mhm. I think too, going along with that, reminded me that we also had to get better at saying no,
Mm,
because a lot of things that were added to our schedules or added to our daily routine. And maybe that was more in, hey, can you stay late or come in earlier, extra days, weekends, or whatever it might be. And then you pick the level that it was going to happen at. But we had to begin to protect ourselves in having that work-life balance. And that, I think that's something now that has really taken a nice foothold. Is the problem solved? No, probably not. But has it vastly improved in the last 20 or 25 years or longer? I really think it has. I think that the younger athletic trainers have set guardrails for themselves to say, this is when I'm going to provide my job and my services. And when things happen beyond that, I need to be able to balance whether that's something that's fair to me or not. And that gains, or that promotes, I think, respect by those above you as well as those below you and maybe even beside you. And that's all helpful for all of us, I think, helps set that tone. But we also had to get good at saying no, I think, as well as promoting ourselves. Exactly. Yeah.
What's a piece of advice you might give a athletic training student or a newer athletic training professional in the athletic training profession?
Yeah. Don't, as I've said it a couple times, don't make those guardrails too burdensome as far as a career goes. And maybe not quite exactly the term that I want to use, but from my later years in undergrad, as I mentioned, junior, senior year, kind of realizing that the collegiate level is where I wanted to practice. And then all of those years, 30 years or so at the collegiate level, never thought I would see myself in a clinic setting, never saw myself outside of the tradition, what I would call traditional athletic training setting, outside of that collegiate athletic training room. Um, Thought at one point, hey, maybe I go to the next level and get into professional sports. There was maybe a couple things that were developing with Major League Baseball expansion, and a lot of our old friends, or a lot of our the folks that have been in athletic training for a while in Indiana. Remember Joe Harvey at Brebeuf High School. He had some opportunity with going into that continuing actually his career in that level, and there might have been an opportunity for myself, but it didn't work out for any of us from that end of things, and maybe for all the right reasons. But from the standpoint of, don't um, focus too much on what your maybe your full career goals are. Make sure that you've got some latitude to be able to adjust and readjust. Never thought at all I would be doing what I'm doing now, and it's been so wonderful the last several years, and so many of the things that we've talked about already, as far as work-life balance and providing healthcare to a needy population and all the things. But boy, I never would have seen that coming, and for that to develop and move forward was really very, very cool. Kind of, I think, a great way for me to end my career at some point in the next handful of years, but we'll see what happens. So for the young folks, being able to take advantage of opportunities, and consider things that maybe are not right in front of you as a next step with your career, whether it's in a business side of things, or it's just treating a different population or something in between. I know when we advertise for new positions, several handful of our employees that we recently brought on said that, full transparency, when I read the job description, in whatever advertisement we were, LinkedIn or whatever we were putting it in, they kind of thought, wait a minute, is this spam? This is kind of too good to be true. So we get a chuckle out of that a little bit. And then once they get one of our administrators on the line and they're actually talking to a real human type thing, they realize, wait a minute, this does exist, and I can go and see this in other areas they are providing care, and so the ability to understand and keep your eyes wide open for that next thing would be a pretty good piece of advice, I think, to take.
Yeah, I like that. I remember, 5 or 6 years ago when you started at your new position and totally changing settings. I remember I was at an IATA meeting and I went up to you and I just felt like the need to tell you thank you for doing that, because it was inspiring for me, because I assumed Ned Shannon was going to stay at UND for the rest of his career. That was kind of, I think, when every athletic training student that came through UND probably thought the
Yeah,
same thing.
yeah.
And so I thought it was
Ned
like,
thought Ned thought that too.
for me, it was like, that was cool to, I think it from what you said, it was like it helped me understand, okay, be open for opportunities. Sometimes we can get so dead set on one certain thing, but and forget about maybe what other settings can offer us. And obviously people's life changes as time goes on and we want people to stay in athletic training because you spend a lot of time educating yourself and learning and spending
Good point.
dollars.
Good
It's
point.
like there's a lot of opportunities out there. And I think that's what it showed me when you did that. I was like, man, there's a lot of opportunities out there and don't be afraid to take that.
Yeah.
And kind of probably outside of your comfort zone a little bit initially, to be like, ooh, especially something that you were very, very comfortable in. And you
Hmm.
knew everybody in the process at
Hmm.
UND. So
Hmm. Yeah, I know big jump was the patient population age. The
yeah,
youngest that I was working with, would be working with when I was doing clinic, 25, 26, 27, up to guys that were a little older than I was. I'd never had any involvement with that, but it was a good transition. You learn some new approaches and learn some new curves on how to do things, but it all, shoulder pain and knee pain and back pain is the same in athletics as it is anywhere else. And you take into some considerations of what the patient brings to the table, and then you move forward with your skill set, and ideally you do a good job. And that's, I think, where a lot of our young and older athletic trainers in the state of Indiana have done such a great job. They've transitioned well into those new areas. And you've had classmates too, I know for sure, that have completely gotten out of athletic training, but not medicine, and they've gone into that administrative role. And so they've used that organizational skill set, that multitasking, that communication, that athletic trainers do so well, and a number of other things, and applied it into that world and have prospered. So it's been really, really been fun to watch those folks do that.
yeah. What's a piece of advice you might give to more veteran athletic trainers in their careers?
Yeah. I don't know if it'd be too much different than that. I think that job burnout is still a thing. I don't know about a big thing, but I think it's still a thing. I think getting caught in that rut of whatever you're doing, even though you might enjoy folks you work with, and maybe the pay is great, and that's maybe one piece that's holding you in that position, but you just don't have that fire anymore. Um, Being able to identify that early enough to where you can maybe start making new bridge or creating new bridges and making new contacts, and then moving in a new direction. Um, because that's the last thing anybody wants is to have some significant mental illness, mental breakdown. Uh, their mental wellness has deteriorated, and then all of a sudden you're no good to anybody, including yourself. So I think being able to identify that, if that were to be a case of a veteran athletic trainer, older athletic trainer, don't feel like you're anybody. I would think is not saying you've got to end your career here, or you've got to end your career in this particular lane. So there again, as I think we spoke about earlier, there's so many more lanes now. That highway has had so many added to it, so many lanes on either side added to it. So that hopefully is an opportunity for those that maybe find themselves more stressed than they should be, and all of a sudden things are becoming physically and mentally more of a challenge, and being able to sidestep that. So I think that's probably my only piece of maybe advice for those folks, maybe mid to late career. Um, and as I mentioned too, I guess even looking in at non-healthcare, you've developed that skill set of organization, of communication, um, uh, being able to manage people. Those things work so well in so many other careers, and I think that could be a value. So identifying what you really feel how you want to end your career is another piece.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, the skill set and one thing that I've always been impressed by with our more veteran athletic trainers and Ned, I'm going to put you in that veteran category. Uh,
Sure.
And one thing I've always been impressed, and this was back to my time at UND, was I remember one day I was just watching you, do some, manual therapy on a patient, doing some joint mobs and stuff like that, and kind of hit me. I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting because I know Ned probably didn't learn those types of things in school, but back to the continuing education and continual learning, continual growing to get better for our patients. I've always thought that was so cool, and I think as an athletic training student, your eyes open to a lot of different things, but it was like, never stop learning because then I'm sure you utilize that skill set just as much as you did, at UND now with, protein tactical. And so I
Yep.
think that's what I've always been amazed is like, okay, these athletic trainers that they could have said, I'm comfortable where I'm doing and how I'm doing it, but never grow. And then you kind of get left behind because as we talked about, things change so rapidly.
Yeah. Well, I think you're exactly right. I think the access to that type of education is so much easier, even for the old guys and ladies. And the excitement, I would think, would still be there for anybody that can learn something online and then be able to take it into their work setting and into their athletic training facility and apply it, and ideally have some positive feedback right away. One thing we did several years ago, a lot of us did the dry needling, and that was a lot of fun to be able to take that back into the athletic training room and apply it and see the success we have, 90+% of the time. So yeah, I think that type of thing definitely is a plus for sure.
Yeah. Well, I didn't have any other questions related to IATA or your presidency. Was there anything that you wanted to add that before you came on the episode today that you wanted to share with people?
Well, no, I think I touched on it. Maybe the last piece I'll throw out, but I touched on it earlier on. Just having interactions with so many great people in the state of Indiana as athletic trainers, and certainly a lot of them were involved with the IATA. Um, I think I was very fortunate, but I wasn't the only one that was fortunate that way. There were so many of us that came through, and I think it continues to happen now, particularly with the summer meetings with NATA. 2005, I think NATA was here in Indianapolis. That was a cool thing that happened during my presidency. Um, but being able to go to those regional meetings, and which is where I think I saw you last, national meetings, even venturing out and going to other district meetings just for the sake of going to somewhere different and registering as a non-member. But from the standpoint of interacting with so many great people side by side, and you would see regularly on the sideline as well, from different states, at least in my old setting. That was such a big thing, I know, in my career, to be able to meet people, watch how they perform as athletic trainers, um, and then also utilize them as a potential resource if needed. If I needed some organizational input for policy procedure at the University of Indianapolis or wherever I was, being able to call some folks at other like areas and say, hey, well, how do you do this? What do you do? And then they would do the same thing, or others would do the same thing with me. So that professional courtesy, I guess, is part of what I'm trying to say too, has been a wonderful interaction all these years. So that's been a real fortunate part of my career.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of great athletic trainers in our state and things that have went on and the things that we've been able to do in our state and all these connections and just getting
Yeah,
together and chit-chatting every once in a while too is a good time. So,
for sure. Yeah.
I have one final question for you. If you could be an animal, what animal would you be
Uh,
and why?
I saw that. I think when the information you sent me, I didn't really think through too much of it at all. I don't know that there's a personality test in a way that you can take. Maybe you've heard of it. That once you've answered this, litany of questions, 20, 25 questions, then it throws out what your spirit animal is. And I'm trying to think. I don't think I was a giraffe, but I was something like a hawk or something along those. And I thought, well, that might work too as well. But I think probably being maybe a bird of some type of hawk or eagle, something along those lines would be cool to be able to be up and see all at once, and with the agility and speed and strength that those birds of prey have are probably pretty cool. I guess that would be kind of neat. That's probably my best guess at that.
Yeah.
It's a good question. Kind of, if you don't know what's coming, which I did. If you don't know what's coming, it can really take you off your game a little bit. That's a good question.
Yeah. Well, Ned, I do appreciate you coming on the IATA podcast and appreciate what you did as the 11th president of the IATA and your service over those years and just appreciate you as an individual and helping with me, my personal education and career. And so I just appreciate you and appreciate what you've done for the IATA.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I'm happy to do this, and I don't get a chance to do it nearly as often as far as speak to other folks and maybe whoever's listening out there as well and watching. But so proud of what you've done and the energy that you continue to bring to the IATA and to the state of Indiana. It's been a real pleasure to see you prosper and move forward in your career from there. So, thank you for the opportunity, Daniel. I appreciate it.
Yeah, appreciate it. You have a good one.
I will. Take care.
Take care.
Thank you for tuning in to the Indiana Athletic Trainers Association podcast. We appreciate you taking time to listen and look forward to you joining us again on the next episode. To find out more about the IATA or to get in touch with us, you can visit our website or reach out via social media.